From the skies over Poland to the desperate final defense of Berlin, German fighter pilots flew some of the most advanced and deadly aircraft ever designed. Legendary machines that struck fear into Allied bomber crews. Revolutionary jets that rewrote the rules of aerial combat. Stopgap designs built from wood and desperation. Each one tells a story of innovation, ambition, and ultimately, overwhelming odds. This is every German fighter of World War II. Early war fighters. Let's begin with the fighters that opened the war. Messerschmitt Bf 109, the backbone of the Luftwaffe. This single-engine fighter became the most produced fighter aircraft in history, with over 33,000 built. It dominated the skies in the early war years, outclassing nearly everything it faced over Poland, France, and the opening stages of the Battle of Britain. Fast, maneuverable, and constantly upgraded, the 109 remained Germany's primary fighter from first day to last. Messerschmitt Bf 110, the Zerstörer, or destroyer. This twin-engine heavy fighter was designed to escort bombers deep into enemy territory with its long range and devastating firepower. It excelled against unescorted bombers but proved vulnerable to nimble single-engine fighters during the Battle of Britain. Despite early setbacks, it found new life as a night fighter, where its radar equipment and heavy armament made it a feared interceptor of RAF bombers. Heinkel He 100, the fighter that never was. This sleek, advanced design actually set a world speed record in 1939, reaching 463 miles per hour. But political infighting and the Luftwaffe's commitment to the Bf 109 killed its production prospects. Only a handful were built, and most ended up as propaganda props, painted with fake unit markings to deceive Allied intelligence about German fighter strength. Arado AR-68, the last biplane fighter. This obsolete design was already being phased out when war began, representing the final gasp of interwar aviation philosophy. It served briefly in Poland and then disappeared to training units. By 1940, it was a relic, completely outclassed by the monoplane revolution sweeping fighter design worldwide. Heinkel He 51, the Spanish Civil War veteran. This biplane fighter saw extensive combat over Spain, giving Luftwaffe pilots their first taste of modern air combat. By World War II's outbreak, it was hopelessly obsolete, relegated to ground attack missions in Poland where flak was less deadly than enemy fighters. It vanished from combat units by 1940, a symbol of how rapidly aviation technology advanced in the late 1930s. Focke-Wulf Revolution. Next on the list, the fighter that challenged the 109's dominance. Focke-Wulf FW-190, the Würger, or Butcher Bird. When this brutal radial engine fighter appeared over France in 1941, it shocked the RAF. Faster, tougher, and more heavily armed than the Spitfire Mark V, it gave Germany air superiority again just when they were losing it. Over 15,000 were built, and it remained the Luftwaffe's second most important fighter throughout the war. Pilots loved its ruggedness and devastating firepower. Focke-Wulf Ta-152, the high-altitude interceptor. This long-winged evolution of the FW-190 was designed specifically to engage Allied bombers at extreme altitudes where the air was thin and cold. With a service ceiling over 48,000 feet, it could climb above anything the Allies flew. But it arrived too late and in too few numbers. Only about 43 saw service before war's end. Those that flew proved exceptional, but Germany no longer had the fuel or pilots to exploit them. Focke-Wulf FW-190D9, the Dora, beloved by pilots. This variant replaced the original radial engine with an inline engine, creating one of the war's finest piston engine fighters. It could match the best Allied fighters at any altitude, and its powerful armament made it deadly against bombers. Introduced in late 1944, it became the mount of choice for Germany's surviving aces. If it had arrived a year earlier, the air war might have been very different. Messerschmitt variants. Moving on to the 109's evolution. Messerschmitt Bf 109E, the Emil, star of the Battle of Britain. This variant represented the 109 at its peak early war effectiveness. It outclassed the Hurricane and traded blows evenly with the Spitfire. Over 4,000 Emils were built, and they formed the sharp edge of Germany's air offensive against Britain. Pilots appreciated its speed and climb rate, though it could be unforgiving in the hands of inexperienced flyers. Messerschmitt Bf 109F, the Friedrich, considered the most balanced variant. This version appeared in 1941 with improved aerodynamics and a more powerful engine. Many aces called it the best-handling 109, with superior maneuverability and speed. It dominated Soviet fighters during Operation Barbarossa and held its own against improving Allied designs. Over 2,200 were produced. Messerschmitt Bf 109G, the Gustav, the most numerous variant. Over 24,000 were built, making up the bulk of Luftwaffe fighter strength from 1942 onward. It emphasized firepower and performance at altitude over maneuverability. Heavily armed with cannon and machine guns, it excelled at bomber interception but became increasingly outmatched by late-war Allied fighters like the P-51 Mustang and Spitfire Mark IX. Messerschmitt Bf 109K, the Kurfürst, the final evolution. This late-war variant squeezed every possible improvement from the aging airframe. With a more powerful engine and pressurized cockpit, it could reach 450 miles per hour and climb to 41,000 feet. Only about 700 were completed before war's end, but those that fought proved the 109 design still had teeth, even after 6 years of war. Twin-engine fighters. Continuing with Germany's twin-engine designs. Messerschmitt Me 210, the disaster that nearly destroyed Messerschmitt. This intended replacement for the Bf 110 was plagued by fatal handling characteristics that killed numerous test pilots. It entered production anyway due to political pressure, but squadrons refused to fly it after multiple crashes. Only about 90 saw limited service before the design was withdrawn and completely reworked. It stands as one of aviation's greatest design failures. Messerschmitt Me 410, the Hornisse, or Hornet. This heavily modified Me 210 fixed most of its predecessor's flaws and became a capable heavy fighter and fast bomber. It served as a bomber-destroyer, mounting enormous 50mm cannons that could obliterate Allied bombers with a single hit. Over 1,000 were built, and it proved effective in the bomber-interceptor role, though by 1944, Allied fighter escorts made its missions increasingly suicidal. Dornier Du 335, the File, or Arrow. This bizarre push-pull twin-engine fighter was one of the fastest piston aircraft ever built, capable of 474 miles per hour. With engines in the nose and tail, it looked like nothing else in the sky. But it arrived in mid-1945 when Germany was collapsing. Only about 40 were completed and few saw combat. Those that flew proved the concept worked, but it was years too late to matter. Henschel HS-129, the Tank Buster. While technically a ground attack aircraft, this heavily armored twin-engine design fought as a specialized fighter against Soviet armor. It mounted a fearsome 75mm cannon that could destroy any tank from above. Slow and underpowered, it needed fighter escort to survive, but in the hands of skilled pilots, it devastated Soviet tank columns on the Eastern Front. Night fighters. Let's look at Germany's nocturnal hunters. Messerschmitt Bf 110G4. The night fighter variant. Equipped with radar arrays and upward-firing cannons in the Schragemusik, or jazz music configuration, this version terrorized RAF bomber streams over Germany. It would slip beneath a Lancaster, invisible in the darkness, then fire upward into the fuel tanks and bomb bay. Hundreds of British bombers fell to these tactics before countermeasures were developed. Heinkel He 219, the Uhu, or Owl. This purpose-built night fighter was arguably the best aircraft of its type in the war. Fast, maneuverable, and equipped with advanced radar and heavy armament, it could dominate British night bombers. One pilot shot down 5 bombers in a single 30-minute sortie. But production was limited to only about 268 aircraft due to bureaucratic interference and competing priorities. Another case of too little, too late. Junkers Ju 88G. The bomber-turned-night fighter. This versatile aircraft started as a bomber but found its true calling hunting in darkness. Equipped with radar and cannon, it became one of Germany's most numerous night fighters with over 3,000 built. Crews appreciated its reliability and range, allowing long patrols over Germany waiting for bomber streams. It remained in service until the final nights of the war. Jet Revolution. Next on the list, the aircraft that changed warfare forever. Messerschmitt Me 262, the Schwalbe, or Swallow, the world's first operational jet fighter. With speeds approaching 540 miles per hour, it was 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied piston fighter. Armed with 4 30mm cannon, a single burst could destroy a bomber. Over 1,400 were built, but fuel shortages, unreliable engines, and Hitler's insistence on using it as a bomber limited its impact. When properly employed, it was nearly untouchable, but by then, Germany was drowning in Allied numbers. Heinkel He-162, the Volksjäger, or People's Fighter. This desperate jet was designed to be built by semi-skilled labor from wood and minimal metal, then flown by hastily trained Hitler Youth pilots. The entire program from design to first flight took just 69 days. An astonishing achievement born of desperation. It was fast and agile but viciously unstable. About 320 were built, but few saw combat. Most sat grounded for lack of fuel or pilots brave enough to fly them. Heinkel He-280, the prototype that lost. This jet fighter actually flew before the Me-262, making it potentially the world's first jet fighter. But political maneuvering and the Luftwaffe's preference for Messerschmitt killed the program. Only 9 prototypes were built. Had Germany backed this design instead, operational jets might have appeared a year earlier, fundamentally changing the air war. Rocket and experimental fighters. Moving on to Germany's most radical designs. Messerschmitt Me-163, the Komet, the only rocket-powered fighter ever deployed. This tiny, swept-wing aircraft could climb to 39,000 feet in under 3 minutes and reach speeds of 600 miles per hour. But its corrosive rocket fuel dissolved pilots who crashed, and its powered flight time was measured in minutes. Over 370 were built, and they shot down about 9 Allied bombers, a terrible return on investment. Spectacular but ultimately ineffective. Focke-Wulf Ba-349, the Natter, or Viper, the most desperate fighter ever conceived. This vertical launch rocket interceptor was designed to be fired straight up at bomber formations, fire all its rockets in a single salvo. Then the pilot would parachute out while the fuselage crashed. Only one manned test flight occurred. The pilot died when the canopy separated. A handful of unmanned launches happened before war's end, but none engaged enemy aircraft. It represents Germany's final, futile desperation. Focke-Wulf Ta-183, the jet that influenced the future. This swept-wing jet fighter design was never completed before Germany's surrender, but its aerodynamic concepts influenced Soviet and American jets for decades. The design became the basis for the Soviet MiG-15, which fought American jets over Korea. It existed only as prototypes and wind tunnel models, but its DNA flew in combat for years after the Reich fell. Blom and Voss BV-40, the glider interceptor. This armored glider fighter was designed to be towed to altitude, then released to dive through bomber formations, firing rockets before landing in a field. The pilot lay prone in the armored nose, protected by thick glass and steel. About 7 were built and tested, but the concept of a throwaway, motorless fighter proved too impractical even for desperate Germany. Naval and specialized fighters. Continuing with specialized variants. Messerschmitt Bf 109T, the carrier fighter that had no carrier. This navalized variant was developed for the Graf Zeppelin aircraft carrier that was never completed. It featured folding wings, arrestor hook, and strengthened landing gear. About 70 were built, but with the carrier project cancelled, they served as land-based fighters in Norway. They represented Germany's brief, failed attempt to challenge British naval air power. Arado AR-240, the failed multi-role fighter. This ambitious design tried to be reconnaissance aircraft, heavy fighter, and dive bomber simultaneously. Succeeded at none. Handling was poor, production was complicated, and performance disappointed. Only about 15 were completed before the program was cancelled. It joined the long list of German aircraft that promised much but delivered little. Late war stopgaps. Let's look at Germany's desperate final designs. Heinkel He-162A2, the improved Volksjäger. This variant fixed some of the original's worst handling problems with modified wingtips and control surfaces. It actually proved reasonably effective, faster than most Allied fighters and more stable than its predecessor. But by April 1945, when it entered service, the Reich had weeks to live. Pilots who flew it said it could have been formidable with proper development time. Messerschmitt Me 262B-1A, the two-seat night fighter variant. This version mounted radar and a second crewman to operate it, creating a jet night fighter. It proved devastatingly effective in the few sorties flown, intercepting British Mosquito night raiders that had previously operated with impunity. Only about 15 were completed, but they pointed toward the future of high-speed nocturnal combat. WW2 the heavy night fighter. This large twin-engine aircraft served primarily as a night fighter and intruder, attacking British bomber bases. It was stable, had long range, and could carry heavy radar equipment and weaponry. Over 350 were built for night fighter duties. Though not glamorous, it performed vital defensive work throughout the war's middle years. Focke-Wulf FW-187, the fighter rejected by politics. This twin-engine heavy fighter flew in 1937 and showed exceptional promise, faster and more maneuverable than the Bf-110. But Focke-Wulf wasn't politically connected to the Nazi hierarchy like Messerschmitt, so only prototypes were built. Had it been adopted, Germany would have had a superior long-range fighter from day one. Captured and modified fighters. Next on the list, the fighters born of necessity. Blom and Voss Bv-155, the extreme altitude interceptor. This heavily modified Bf-109 variant was designed to intercept American B-29 Superfortress bombers expected over Germany. With a pressurized cockpit and enormous wings for high-altitude flight, it could theoretically reach 52,000 feet. Only prototypes flew before war's end. Ironically, B-29s never bombed Germany, making the entire program pointless. Messerschmitt Me 309, the advanced fighter that couldn't compete with its predecessor. This design incorporated retractable landing gear that tucked into the fuselage and a tricycle undercarriage. But it offered no performance advantage over the proven Bf-109, and the Luftwaffe refused to disrupt production for a marginal improvement. Only 4 prototypes were built. Sometimes good enough beats theoretically better. From the legendary Bf-109 to desperate rocket interceptors, from the jet revolution to wooden emergency fighters, these 30-plus designs tell the story of Germany's air war. Each represents innovation pushed to extremes by necessity, ambition, and ultimately, overwhelming Allied industrial power. Some became legends, others barely flew. Together, they defined aerial combat in history's largest conflict. Which design do you think had the most impact? Drop your answer in the comments.